Hi, friends. Welcome. This is Rabbi Julia Andelman, Director of Community Engagement at JTS. I'm so pleased that you are able to join us today. We're all entering Pesach under circumstances that for us are unprecedented. In fact, for Jews throughout history, there have been pandemics and other really challenging times, but for us, we've never had a Pesach like this. So many of us are going to be at much smaller seders and different kind of sedarim than we're used to. So it's good to be together at a moment like this to kind of be able to ask questions and just get some chizuk, some strength from each other. So I'm really pleased that you've joined us. I want to make sure you know that after Pesach, we are going to have a slew of new online learning. So sorry for the sounds in my house. Stay tuned for those. We'll make sure to alert you to everything by email. I wanted to thank my colleague, Rabbi Tim Bernard, who is our Director of Digital Learning, who has arranged this webinar for us. And of course, Rabbi Dr. Schwartz, who I'll introduce in a moment. Just a few instructions. If you're not already a pro at Zoom, which I imagine everyone is so much comfortable with Zoom than they were just 2 weeks ago, but I want to make sure everyone knows how to raise their hand. So if you go to at the bottom of your Zoom screen where it says participants, if you click there, then a panel will come up on the top right, and you can see your name, and there's a little hand button, little hand icon there that you can press to raise your hand. Feel free to test it out now. And if you decide you don't want to ask your question, you can click it again and unraise it. If you're calling by phone, you can also raise your hand, press *9. That will show us that you're raising your hand, and *9 to lower your hand. And Tim will call on people and unmute them when he's answering a question. So we're going to try to do questions that way rather than in the chat, because the chat just gets, feel free to ask things in the chat, but it just gets very full. So we're going to try to do questions in that way. You should have all received a source sheet by email. So make sure to check your email if you don't already have that. I think Tim can post the link as well, but you should have it in your email. I think that is everything other than introducing Morty. Did I get everything, Tim? Okay, great. So we're really very pleased that on such short notice, Rabbi Mordecai Schwartz has agreed to teach this webinar, either giving us the basics or giving us a refresher for how to kosher our kitchens for Pesach and prepare everything we need to prepare to have at least a kosher holiday, if not an unusual one. Rabbi Schwartz is the director of the Beit Midrash at JTS, and he, in that capacity, oversees our Nishma intensive summer learning program, and he's also assistant professor of Talmud and Rabbinics at JTS. I'll just note his new book, released just over the summer, called Rewriting the Talmud, on the effective tradition from the land of Israel and the composition of the Babylonian Talmud. And Rabbi Schwartz has also been doing great additional work for JTS's community learning efforts. He has a wonderful podcast on the evolution of rabbinic literature. You should check that out on our podcast page. And he's going to be teaching another course on really understanding how the Talmud works, a live online course starting in May. So we'll send you information on that too, but I hope you'll be able to continue learning not just with JTS, but especially with Rabbi Schwartz. And with that, I turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi Andelman. I appreciate that very, very much. It was a very kind and gracious introduction. I am going to go through the process of koshering, and I'm also going to talk a little bit about what actually is prohibited and permitted on Pesach, because there seems to me to be some confusion as the result of a variety of different sorts of customs that people have adopted. So what I want to do before I actually go to the handout and start going through the material is I want to give you some of my assumptions, larger assumptions and concepts that I'm going to refer to throughout the course of this presentation. So it's important that you know that I conceptualize, and most rabbis conceptualize, Jewish law as being broken into 3 areas. That is, things which are prohibited by the Torah, Secondly, things which are prohibited by the rabbis. And third, things which are prohibited by custom. These three different levels of law are really important for us to understand before we enter into the discussion that we're going to have. So let me just say, these are not historical categories. In other words, when I say something is prohibited by the Torah, I don't necessarily mean that there's a verse prohibiting it. And when I say something is prohibited by the rabbis, there may well be a verse that actually indicates that such a thing is biblical. The rabbis of the Talmud arrogated them to themselves the notion that they had more or less the interpretive authority to determine what things were actually considered to be from the Torah or from on Torah level in terms of prohibition, either as part of oral Torah or as the result of some midrashic tradition. And they also had the arrogated to themselves the right to declare that something in the Torah that's written in the Torah itself may not actually be applicable to our day and age, and instead they classify it as a rabbinic prohibition. And then finally, there's custom. Custom is just something that people start doing, and we'll talk a little bit about that later, but there may not be any rhyme or reason to custom. It's just something that a community adopts. And so the question is, how does a community undo a custom? And the answer is they stop doing it. So we'll have to talk about that a little bit as we go through this material as well. So once again, these three categories are not historical. What they are is legal or halachic in their categorization, but it's very important that we understand those three levels of law as we go through the material. Okay, so with that, I am going now to share my screen, and we'll go to this handout that I prepared. Okay. So this is, first of all, a discussion of what foods are actually prohibited, which we need to talk about before we actually talk about the process of koshering. So the Torah prohibits chametz, right? So what actually is chametz? So chametz is, generally speaking, food that is made with wheat, barley, oats, spelt, or rye. So, for instance, as you know, bread, crackers, but also things like a barley porridge or oatmeal would all actually be considered to be chametz. So this is prohibited at a very, very high level, chametz on Passover. The Torah says that a person who eats chametz is going to be cut off. We don't know exactly what that means, what the isur karet, the prohibition that results in cutting off, is, but it's some sort of very serious, prohibition that is going to be punished by God. So as a result of that, since the Torah treats it so seriously, we, generally speaking, treat prohibitions around chametz with great anxiety. So the Torah has a variety of verses which tells us that one may not possess chametz or benefit from chametz or even have these products within sight in your home. Meaning, if you, in fact, are selling your chametz, not only do you have to sell it, you have to put it away and make sure that you cannot see it, and even rent the place in which it is contained to the non-Jew during the course of Passover. I'll talk more about mechirat chametz a little bit later, but the idea is you're not supposed to see chametz over the course of Pesach in your own home as much as you can. So all of that is chametz. However, there's a second category called ta'arovet chametz, which are mixtures of chametz. These are things where you might not necessarily be able to see the chametz, but in fact, it is also prohibited. It's not prohibited at the same level as the things which you can see, chametz ba'ayin, the things that you are able to see, but it is still prohibited, and it is prohibited by the Torah, even though it is not in that higher category of things which are an isur karet, which is punishable by being cut off, whatever that means. So the mixtures of chametz that we generally, talk about are things like if you made a cholent with barley in it. The barley may have completely disintegrated, and all you can see in there is the vegetables and the meat. But in fact, that's considered to be a tarovet chametz, and it needs to be gotten rid of before Passover begins, or sold. If it's going to be a great financial loss, so you can throw these things in the freezer sometimes. We'll talk about that. Okay, there's a third category which is called chametz nuksha, which is spoiled or hardened chametz. It is also prohibited, but generally speaking, this is classified as a rabbinic prohibition and not a biblical prohibition. And we'll get to later on what the significance of that is. Mostly it has to do with whether or not you can actually use these things after Passover. Generally speaking, if you have something that's a Torah prohibition, like chametz, regular chametz, ba'ayin chametz that you can actually see as chametz, or the ta'arovet chametz, that mixture of chametz, and you keep it in ownership over the course of Passover, you may not, generally speaking, use it after Passover. However, the hardened chametz, the chametz nuksha, is even if you keep it over, is generally allowed to be used after Passover. What's an example of chametz nuksha, of this hardened chametz? So there are certain cosmetics that actually use starches, wheat starches, in their production. It's hard to know which use cornstarch and which use wheat starch. Generally speaking, those products that are starches that are used in cosmetics are referred to as maltodextrin. It's a binding agent. It is not edible, and so it is not biblically prohibited to keep that stuff over the course of Passover. However, it is in fact a prohibition to have it in your possession or to eat it rabbinically. And so there are people who are very careful to avoid chametz nuksha on Passover, and to buy certain toothpastes and things of this nature that have a special hechsher. I think for the most part this year, since it's a rabbinic prohibition, we should be lenient about cases in which there is doubt about whether it's cornstarch or wheat starch in your cosmetics, and you don't have to get rid of your cosmetics this year if you're accustomed to do so in other years. Okay, I'm going to talk about these foods that are in fact require no Passover certification. So I mentioned. I may have mentioned that let me go down here, that all processed foods, actually I haven't mentioned this yet, all processed foods with more than a single ingredient do require Passover supervision. However, those with a single ingredient, and that includes dairy products like cheese or milk, may be purchased before Passover without Passover supervision. So on the Rabbinical Assembly website, you should have this linked in in the email you received beforehand. There are lists for this year in particular. So the first list is things that require no Passover certification, no matter when you purchase them, right? The second is a list of things that, generally speaking, we prefer you purchase before Passover, but this year, if you can't get it until after Passover already starts, you can go ahead and get them. And then there is kitniyot, and we'll talk about kitniyot in just a second. And then we will also have a list of things that require Passover certification at any time. I am not going to go through these lists right now because you can look at them yourselves. I do want to give you some principles in just a second to explain these things, but before I do so, I want to talk about kitniyot. There's in general a custom to refrain from eating certain foods. In other words, Ashkenazim specifically have a custom where they do not eat certain foods over Passover that are actually not forbidden at all. These include beans, corn, millet, peas, rice, and soy. As I said, these are not prohibited on Passover, either by the Torah or by the rabbis. And Sfaradim historically have eaten all of these things over the course of Passover. There is a law committee paper which allows Ashkenazic Jews to do away with the custom of kitniyot. In general, I'm not a fan of that. I think that the customs that come out of the kitchens of Israel are enhanced, let's say it that way, the experience of Passover. But that said, this year, the RA is encouraging people to actually not continue with this custom, at least for this year, of kitniot. In general, every single year, you do not need to sell kitniot or get rid of them. You can keep them over the course of Passover. You can even keep them out in the open, and that you are not violating any prohibition. Obviously, this year, if you are eating kitniot, then there's no prohibition altogether. I would also tell you what my practice is. My practice is to avoid kitniot over Passover. I am going to continue this year avoiding kitniot over Passover, but I restrict kitniot to those species of food, those products, which were extant before the New World was discovered. So in other words, I eat corn because I do not consider corn to be kitniot. I eat edamame, I eat whole soy, because I do not consider soy to be kitniot. The same thing's true of peanuts, all of which are New World items. However, I refrain from eating rice, and because it was in the original custom that Ashkenazic Jews had in Europe. So this is the way that I generally deal with kitniot most of the year, and it's how I'm going to continue to deal with it this year. However, I'm not getting rid of my kitniot. I don't think we should be getting rid of any food, actually, when we really need our pantries to be deep under this kind of circumstance that we are in. So I'm going to say it one more time, if you are going to eat kitniot, you should eat unprocessed kitniot or have Passover supervision if it's processed. You have to treat it just like other permitted foods. And if you are going to eat rice, there is a custom to go through the rice very carefully to ensure that there's no other grain in that rice. If you're interested in how to do so, there are lots of places you can look, Sephardic websites online that tell you how to go through the process of sorting through the rice. Okay. Now I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction to the reasons for things. This is going to be quick. If you have questions about this, hold on to them, and I will answer any questions that you have at the end. So the first thing I'm going to say, a principle that we have that allows us to move ahead with the question of what koshering actually is the notion that flavor is prohibited just as much as the actual item itself. So if you have an item that contains the flavor of chametz, in other words, the flavor of chametz actually gets into that item, then that flavor, if it's a vessel, has to be removed. This is a rabbinic notion, this notion of ta'am ki'itar, and it's what creates the need for instance, separate vessels from meat and dairy and separate Passover vessels, because the concern is that the flavor is going to transfer. Now, the secret I'm going to tell you is a major thing. It undermines this principle pretty severely, which is that after 24 hours, or if you wash the item with bleach, it's considered to be negative flavor. It's considered to be a flavor that has gone off, and therefore is not the same as the prohibited flavor. And what this means is, if something is cooked in a pot which has rested for 24 hours, the food itself is in fact permitted. This is why in the Passover guide, if you look, when it's talking, there's a leniency for older people who cannot go through the process of koshering their pots and pans, that it's too onerous for them. The leniency is that they can wash out their pan thoroughly and then with detergent, and then let it sit for 24 hours, and then designate it as a Passover pan. The reason for this is because
as long as that's done before Passover, any flavor which is in there has been destroyed by the process of that washing. The result of this is that koshering, the process of, purging flavor that we do go through in advance of Passover, is a kind of initiation ritual. It's almost a kind of conversion ritual for the pots and the pans. In the case of making them simply for a kosher kitchen, that process is kind of a process of making them Jewish pots and pans. And then that process, when we're talking about Passover, it's a process of making them Passover pots and pans. And so the notion is that older people who have difficulty with the process of going through all of the koshering can, in fact, fulfill that idea through the act of designation, a thorough cleaning with detergent, and then a designation. That is a leniency that is only available right now for this year because we want to maintain the higher level of koshering, let's say it that way, for all of the years to come. And it's only a leniency that is if you have physical difficulty and you have no one else who can help you purge the pots and pans. Okay, during Passover, the smallest amount of chametz, right? The smallest amount, like a crumb, will make a mixture off limits, right? However, any combinations that occur before Passover uses the simple rule of nullification that we use year-round, because Passover hasn't started when that mixture occurred. So if you have this year an open container of milk or an open container of orange juice, and you're afraid that some chametz may have fallen into it, you do not have to get a new container of milk, a new unopened container of milk. You can, in fact, continue to use that container of milk or that container of orange juice, which has been opened before Passover. The same is true of spices. You do not this year need to have separate spices. You can use your regular spices. The notion being that any chametz that actually fell in there is nullified by more than 60 times the permitted substance. However, anything that you combine during Passover, right? Any kind of admixture that you are going to create where you are afraid that chametz may have fallen into it during the period of Passover, you in fact need to sort of put to the side, get rid of, and in fact not use. So this is the reason that there's this whole list of foods, which I'm going to show you again, that usually require a Passover hefsher, usually require a Passover supervision, because we're concerned that, in fact, if, for instance, you purchase fish from a fish store or a fish stand, that the process of filleting the fish, and there's chametz elsewhere in the store, that in fact some amount of chametz may have gotten in there. That's why we, in general, want you to purchase those types of things before Passover, before any kind of combination could have occurred. However, this year, we're going to be more lenient than normal, and we're going to say that if you cannot find these items before Passover, and you cannot find these items with a kosher for Passover supervision, then you can go ahead and use those items even on Passover, because the greater likelihood is that there is no chametz that's actually gotten in there. All you have, for instance, is the filleted fish. Again, these things are up on the RA website, where it's the Kashrut Subcommittee recommendations for Passover on 5780. I would urge you to go and take a look at those lists, although not necessarily right now. Okay, so fine. So now how do you go through the process of absorption and purging? What is the process of actually what we call koshering the vessels? In general, the principle for reinitiating I have here the vessels into the Passover kitchen is kabol o kach polto, that a vessel, since a vessel releases its flavor at the same temperature that it absorbs it, we go through the process of removing those flavors as if the flavors were actually still in it, right? So first of all, it is very important that you let those vessels, if you're going to go through the process, the traditional process of koshering, that you let those vessels sit for a 24-hour period, and then you clean them out thoroughly. If you cannot clean it, then you cannot kosher it. So vessels that are like a frying pan, vessels that are exposed directly to fire without water in them are koshered by what's called libun, the application of fire. My suggestion is, if you are going to try and kosher a frying pan, if you really can't just sort of purchase an additional frying pan, that you're going to have to use to wrench some kind of a torch. I recommend against this. I don't think it's very, very safe. I think it's much better simply to buy a small frying pan and kind of just leave it at that. However, water vessels can be exposed to water at their maximum temperature. So the general process of this is that what you do is you boil the water inside of that vessel, and then you drop a piece of rock or stone into the vessel. That causes it to the boiling water to sort of overflow in a short way, in a way which is containable. And then what you do is since it has been boiled completely, the notion is that it has given up all of its theoretical flavor, and that accomplishes the purging, or at least the theoretical purging, in order to initiate it into the Passover kitchen. So metal can be purged in the way that I've described already. Glass. Glass is a special category. The problem with glass is that in the time of the Talmud, in fact, through the Middle Ages, glass could not contain heat. It was impossible for you to cook using a glass vessel. And therefore, glass was considered to be in its own category and only needed to be washed. There was this Ashkenazic custom, which I think very few people follow today, of changing the water and in the glasses over the course of 3 days for each 24-hour period. There is no necessity to do such a thing. You can just glasses that just contain cold liquid can just be washed and rinsed out thoroughly, and then they can immediately be used for Passover. On the other hand, non-Passover glasses, since they now can, non-Passover glasses that are used for hot liquids, right? Meaning if you put them in the microwave or if you put them in the oven, here's the issue. They are like ceramic vessels, generally speaking, because the notion is that they actually are holding heat, and the flavor transfers into them. And so generally speaking, we say that you should put those away until after Passover. That is what the Passover guide from the RA says, and I have not seen them come out with a leniency about glass, which is used for cooking, or for ceramic. There is no way to kosher these things. However, plastic you can treat like a metal, and if you can endure boiling water, you can purge it for Passover. Cooking appliances are generally speaking metal vessels and can be purged in the exact same way. So ovens, for instance, have to be thoroughly cleaned. You have to use some kind of cleanser on them, or they can be cleaned with a self-cleaning cycle. Although again, using a self-cleaning cycle on an oven, what it does is it removes the stop from occurring as a result with the thermostat. And so it can be a little bit dangerous. And I'm not a big fan of self-cleaning cycles as a result, not because it doesn't work, but because it's a little, in my opinion, using a self-cleaning cycle on an oven is problematic for reasons of safety. Steam can generally be used for a microwave. What you do is you clean out the microwave thoroughly, and then you actually put in a cup of liquid, some type of a coffee mug or of a other type of microwave safe dish, and you put it on a temperature or put it on a timer that will be such that there will be steam inside the microwave for some short period of time. And that's enough to actually cleanse the microwave. That is considered to be enough. Unlike an oven, you do not have to sort of like empty it out and run it at top temperature because that could damage the microwave. Refrigerators can simply be cleaned with a cleanser. It is very important also that you do not put layers of paper on the actual racks, that you only use the racks themselves, because that'll prevent the airflow from going in your refrigerator, and you're going to wind up with spoiled food. So my suggestion with a refrigerator is simply that you wipe it down with some kind of a cleanser. You wipe down the racks, and that's it. You'll note here I wrote, it is forbidden to cover your refrigerator cells in a way that blocks airflow, because it's forbidden to endanger your health because of potentially spoilage of the food. In terms of the burners on an oven top, just like a range, just like with an oven where you clean it off as well as you can, and then run it at the top temperature for some short period of time, maybe 3 minutes, 5 minutes, some period of time, until in fact it releases or could theoretically release its forbidden flavors. You do the exact same thing with the range on the top. What you do is you run the burners, if it's a gas range, for instance, or if it's an electric range, at their top temperature for after you've thoroughly cleaned it for a few minutes, and that actually is what koshers it. So there are some problems with modern ranges. So there's such a thing as an induction range now, and an induction range may or may not have specific burners. The only way, there's no temperature, there's no hot temperature with an induction range. It uses sort of electromagnetism to heat up the pot itself. And so what you have to do is you have to take one of those pots, put them on the burners if it has burners, and run those burners with water inside the pot at its highest temperature for some period of time. Once the water boils, you know that in fact it's actually run at that point, run it at a rolling boil, continue that rolling boil for a couple of minutes. Here's the problem with the ranges that do not have those burners. It's the entire cooking service if you have that type of an induction oven. And then what you're going to have to use is the cookie sheet method, where you get it hot and you sort of make an imaginary grid on the top of your oven, and you move that cookie sheet around. So good. So in sum, what I'm going to say is, again, just to briefly review this, ovens, thoroughly clean them, with some kind of cleanser, get it really clean. And then after you've done that cleaning cycle, then you run it at its hottest temperature for, a few minutes, enough time that it actually reaches that temperature. A microwave, you clean with steam using the coffee cup method. Refrigerators, you just wash down with cleanser. And ranges are thoroughly cleaned, and you actually run those burners at the hottest temperature. And induction ranges are problematic. You have to deal with them in the way that I've described. all those instructions that I mentioned, they're all in the kashrut report, the leniencies for this year that the RA has put out. Okay, now in terms of countertops and sinks, one of the most visual indicators, and one of the greatest visual indicators that in fact it is Passover, is that Ashkenazim have a custom of covering their countertops during the course of Passover, and that this is a way of ensuring that in fact no food comes into contact with the countertops. This is because for a very long time countertops were wood, and there wasn't really a super great way of koshering them. These days, you can in fact kosher your countertops if they're a material that can stand up to boiling water, and if they are in fact a non-ceramic, which most of them are. Stone is not considered to be a ceramic. And the idea here is that what you would do is you thoroughly clean them, and then you would pour in a very careful way boiling water over the top of the countertops. Now, in my opinion, and this is my own leniency, this has not been approved by the RA, the countertops themselves can simply be, in this year, and in fact probably in all years, can simply be washed down with a thorough washing, and then you can take a combination of 1 part bleach to 3 parts water, and you can pour that over your countertops, and that will eliminate any negative flavors. It will also eliminate the problems of hairline cracks and those types of things. Then if you do that, since all of the flavor has been destroyed, and in fact, I don't consider the countertops to be a vessel which contains food, at that point, you can simply go ahead and use the countertops. And in this year, I would tell people, when there's such a lack of basic kitchen needs like paper towels, and in fact, there's a lack of paper goods in general, and a lack of, from what I've seen, contact paper as well, that probably you don't have to cover your countertops. I'll let you in on a secret. I never cover my countertops. When I told my mother that a few years ago, she received it with great rejoicing. Okay, fine. The other piece of this is if there are parts of your countertop which are stained with food stains and you really, really can't clean them, then you probably should cover up those particular portions. Okay, so fine. Metal sinks can be purged by working very carefully with boiling water, and it is a vessel. So you should start at the bottom and work your way up until you have completely purged the metal sink. Ceramic sinks like porcelain cannot be purged at all. You have to do is you have to use Passover racks and tubs, and just be careful about not touching the sides of those things. But there's really nothing you can do. I would recommend the bleach solution as well, in order to ensure that there's no actual flavor that might transfer from the sink, and to have some way of initiating it. Okay, that is everything, including the various leniencies. I have sort of put the links to the various elements of the RA, both the Passover guide and the RA leniencies for 5780. As links into the body of this document, which you should all have. I've also put in the sale of chametz, which I'm doing as part of this as well. I'm going to talk briefly about the sale of chametz, very, very briefly. In most years, I get rid of all of my chametz, which is ironic because I do handle the sale of chametz for JTS most years. But it's better in most years to get rid of your chametz. This year, I think there's a special leniency for the sale of chametz beyond just financial loss, and that is we should maintain, I think, deep pantries in this circumstance, so that we can go shopping less frequently. And as a result, I would not be getting rid of food, any type of food, over the course of Passover. I would sell my chametz using, and I'm doing this year. This is the first year in a long time that I'm not getting rid of all my chametz. I would sell my chametz through the RA website, and then I would put it away somewhere. Bag it up, put it in the basement, put it in the bottom of the refrigerator if it needs to be refrigerated in a paper bag, some kind of thing where you can't see it, and then do the same thing in the freezer. Maintain these things until after Passover is over. Okay, so that's it. That's the all of my recommendations, and now I'm open for questions.
As a reminder, if you want to ask questions, you should click on participants at the bottom of your screen, and then on the participants panel that comes up at the bottom, there's a button to raise hand. And if you're on the phone only, you can press *9 on your keypad to raise your hand.
Yes, can you call on Susie? Susie Weiner?
Oh, okay. Am I unmuted?
You are unmuted, Susie.
Okay. So what do you
Good
do
to see you,
with,
by the way.
what do you do with dishwashers?
Good. I never talked about dishwashers. That's really, really important. Okay, so my answer is wash it down thoroughly and run it one time with detergent, with nothing in it. What that will do is it'll get it as hot as it can possibly get, and you'll also get the destruction of flavor from the detergent. I should let you know, it is my opinion that their dishwashers, generally speaking, are not really a vessel. We don't use them to hold food. We use them to wash other vessels. I should mention one other thing. You should be careful if you've got a removable trap to remove the removable trap and take all the food junk that's in that removable trap out before you clean it. That's very important. But I put both milchik and fleishik utensils and vessels in the dishwasher at the same time. There is no transfer of flavor that occurs in a dishwasher. First of all, it doesn't really get hot enough to do that, and second of all, the detergent inside is going to nullify any flavors. And so I have no problem putting both meat utensils and dairy utensils at the same time in the dishwasher. I would recommend against putting Passover utensils and non-Passover utensils in the dishwasher at the same time, like at the end of Passover. That's probably not a good thing to do, but I do think you should probably have some kind of initiation ritual. I think that's probably something that anyone, even if they've got a reduced, a relatively reduced physical capacity, could in fact accomplish before Passover. It's just running the dishwasher one time without anything in it. Yeah.
Joy?
Hi.
Hi, Joy. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Even though I walked right by your house today.
Yeah.
Two questions. One is,
Sure.
You're recommending not using the self-cleaning cycle from a self-cleaning oven and just cleaning it itself?
I feel like self-cleaning cycles they scare me. I have heard about too many fires that have started in homes from self-cleaning cycles. There is a YouTube channel whose name I'm blocking right now. It's a woman who does cleaning, right? That's her thing. It's all about how to clean things. It's an amazing YouTube channel. And she recommends against ever using a self-cleaning cycle just because of the danger. If you are going to use a self-cleaning cycle, then I recommend you move the oven as far away from the wall or as far away from the counter as possible. It gets so hot, some of them get close to 1,000 degrees during a self-cleaning cycle. And I just think it's very, very, very dangerous to have something that's that hot in your house Just as I said about the racks in the refrigerator, being careful not to block the airflow, that's forbidden. I'm not ready. I know there are lots of people who actually do the self-cleaning cycle, so I'm not ready to say it's forbidden, but I highly recommend against it. And I don't think you need it. You just need to get the oven as hot as it would get during regular cooking.
Okay, like using easy off or something like that?
Yeah, use easy off, and then, most ovens go up to about 500 degrees at their highest setting. Some of them go up to 550, but I think running it at that temperature until you hear like the beep, mine beeps once it reaches that temperature, that's enough. And there's no need to use that massive, self-cleaning cycle. It's like taking a shotgun to a fly. Yes.
Itai? Unmuted? No, I'm unmuted. Hi. I had one question, and now I might have a couple. One of them is about waiting 24 hours before doing Hagala.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's easier, you can just, you eat out at work, you eat at somewhere else, and like you wait. That 24 hours is not that onerous, but at these times it's kind of hard. Now, I was wondering if, according to kind of like building on what you said, instead of waiting 24 hours, would it be okay to wash stuff with something that has bleach in it?
Yeah.
And that would kind of like spoil the taste of the things.
Yeah, no, it's true. If you don't have enough pots that you can't like sort of designate, like 3 pots for Pesach or whatever, then yeah, that's a leniency that I think you can use. I think what you can do is you thoroughly clean it out with detergent, whatever. And again, the solution I recommend is 1 part bleach, 3 parts water, and just go ahead and pour it in there. That's going to destroy any flavor that you have, and then you can go ahead and do the koshering process. I would not recommend that in any other year, but I think in this year we can probably be lenient and allow that.
I see. And I have maybe another quick question about glass mugs, which you said cannot be koshered, but it looks like in the Rabbinical Assembly, like in the guide, it kind of like falls between the cracks. There's like something about serving glass stuff that you can actually go through.
I'm assuming you're not talking about like glass beer mugs, but instead you're talking about like coffee.
Yeah.
So what I would say about this is if it's glass and you put it in the microwave, you can't kosher it. Sorry.
If you put it in a microwave.
Yeah.
Okay.
If it's a kli sheni, in other words, if you have like an electric kettle that you always use, and then you use like put the tea bag in there and then pour it over, that's considered to be a kli sheni, and that can be simply rinsed out, and you don't need to worry about it at all. It's just treat it like regular plain old glass. Because the notion is it's not a kli rishon, it's not something that's directly cooked in, and so it's not considered to be like a ceramic vessel that you cook with. However, if you put glass plates or glass mugs or a glass anything into a microwave and you microwave it, then at that point it is a kli rishon, and it cannot be kosher. There's no way of doing that. I would say the same thing about any glass cookware as well. That is my opinion. There are people in the world who allow, glass to be kosher because they consider it to be non-porous. I do not believe that's the reason for the original rabbinic permission within the dispensation within the Talmud about glass vessels. I think it's just because they didn't get that hot. These days, there are many ceramics that we say can't be kosher that are actually non-porous as well. And so if we're going to maintain that about those ceramic vessels, then we have to maintain it about glass as well, in my opinion.
Hi. So my question is about air fryers, and are those kosherable as typically metal objects with sometimes a nonstick coating that get to up to 400 degrees normally when they cook.
Okay, so we've got a problem both with air fryers and also with Instant Pots. Both of those things are somewhat problematic. I'll address the Instant Pots, which you didn't ask about first, and then I'll go to the air fryer. Instant Pots are problematic because they can be used as saute pans, basically as a frying pan. And so you would have to do libun on them, which means direct application of fire. And so I recommend putting an Instant Pot away over the course of Passover. In terms of an air fryer, there are different sorts of air fryers. If you're talking about, you know, the metal mesh basket air fryers, where the basket contains all of the food items, that actually you can just get as hot as it gets when it's on its own cycle. Some of these things have plastic handles, which is problematic. If it doesn't have a plastic handle, then you're in luck, because then all you have to do is stick it in the oven at over 400 degrees until it gets that temperature, and then you can let it cool down, and then you can go ahead and use it. If it has a plastic handle, then there's probably no way of doing it short of a blowtorch and then doing hagalah, boiling with the handle. And so for the most part, those types of air fryers, even though it's theoretically possible, you're probably not going to be able to actually use. Now, if it's one of these things that has a drawer with where the metal part is actually attached, there's really nothing you can do short of libun. You really have to, put a blowtorch to that thing, and then you might end up ruining the air fryer. It's unfortunate because the only way that those things actually run safely is with a little bit of oil in them, and so you can't just run a cycle, because then you're sort of involving the oil in the process. That is my impression anyway. I don't know. I've never talked to someone who's actually run an air fryer without the oil in it, if it actually came out okay. I imagine that would burn out the heating element.
Naomi?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Hi.
Hi, how are you doing?
Great. Nice to see you. I have a couple of really quick questions.
Sure.
One has to do with oven racks. If I do go the route of self-cleaning,
Yeah.
I've always been in a quandary because I rent an apartment. The oven racks aren't supposed to be done on self-clean, and if you do them on self-clean, you kind of wreck them.
Yeah.
Any
That's because they'll melt. They will warp and melt.
Rabbi Schwartz, I'm having an increasingly hard time hearing you. I don't know if your microphone moved, but if maybe you could talk a little slower.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. I said that's because it gets so hot in those self-cleaning cycles that it just ruins the racks. They go all out of shape, and because they've actually melted a little bit in the process of the self-cleaning cycle.
But how do you if you don't do the self-cleaning cycle, is simply being at a certain temperature enough to?
Yeah, so the hot, you have to run the oven first of all, everything's thoroughly cleaned and whatever, but then you have to run the oven at its highest cooking temperature for a period of time that is long enough that the racks themselves will actually attain that temperature. So, get it up to 500 and then wait, another 5-10 minutes at that temperature to ensure that the cooking racks have gotten thoroughly hot. And then that's enough. You also, if you're going to go to that, if that's what you're going to do, by the way, for the racks, then you might as well not do the self-cleaning cycle, right? You might as well just get, the cleanser, which you have to do anyway if you're going to do the self-cleaning cycle to clean everything off, and then just run the oven at 500 degrees or 550, whatever your top temperature is. Yeah.
I was also hoping you could discuss the the cookie sheet method. So I have one of those electric stoves, not induction or anything fancy, but there's burners, there's set burners, but I've always wondered about the space between the burners.
Yeah, as long as you are, you have separate burner spaces, then you don't have to worry about the cookie sheet method, right? Because the goal here is to kosher the burners. The idea is that if you have all the burners going for some period of time, you're going to get the in-between spaces as hot as they ever get anyway. And so, again, just thoroughly, it's one of those glass plates, right? Yeah. So yeah, so what you do is you just wipe it down, wash it down, clean it off the way you normally would, and then run it at the highest temperature, all of them at the same time, and make sure that it gets to that temperature, and then you're fine.
And I feel a little bad, I'm taking a lot of time, but I saw someone wrote in chat, they wanted to know about crock pots, and I wanted to know about George Foreman grill, little one.
Oh, the George Foreman grill, yeah. So crock pots are usually used with water. They are considered to be a ceramic vessel, if you in fact have that ceramic insert. There are some crock pots today that actually use metal inserts rather than ceramic inserts. If you have one of those, then it's just hagala, and it's very, very simple. If not, then what you would have to do, and you can do this on Amazon, you can purchase a separate insert for whatever particular model of crock pot that you have. I don't know, they're probably more expensive now than they would be in other years. And then you can have one for Pesach if you want to. I understand that it is, with small apartments, it's like difficult to have all of these things. This is not storage. I would recommend, if you've got one of those ceramic crock pots, just putting it away until Passover is over, see if you can, do without for a week, something like that, if you can't get another insert. Yeah.
On a practical note, if you order something from Amazon, it may not arrive before Pesach this year.
Oh, that's true also. That's true also. Yeah, no. I bought my crock pot insert several years ago at this point, so yeah.
Joy?
Oh, so a small technical question. From what you said earlier during the webinar, if I bought Parmesan cheese that says kosher for Passover, but I used it, say, this week or last week, but I poured it out and didn't pour anything in, then technically I could use it for Passover?
No problem at all. In general, we tell people in most years to buy a new one for Passover. There really isn't a need to do that in any year. You really could use single ingredient things like cheese or milk or even a plain almond milk. You could just keep it and use it on Passover, using the idea that anything that fell in there before Passover, and it's sort of nullified by 60. And the likelihood, by the way, with like a milk carton or with like a Parmesan cheese sprinkler is very, very low that anything actually did fall in there. And I would say just go ahead and use it, no problem.
Because I had orange juice and olive oil also in that category.
Yeah, orange juice and olive oil, same deal. These are not combined things. They are single ingredient things. You can be pretty sure to the point that you need to be, let's say it that way, that no chametz of any size or substance has actually fallen in there until you get the nullification before Passover starts.
I think there's a couple of questions in the chat while we're waiting for any others.
Yeah, please. Let's see. Can you point them to me, because the chat is like really, really, really big here.
There was one about the process for cooking for Shabbat.
Right. So this year we have a 3-day Yom Tov, which means that what you're going to have to do is the Eruv Tavshilin. There is I believe it's both in Sim Shalom and in the Brachot section. I'm not sure about Lev Shalem, but I would be surprised if it isn't there. You can go ahead and do the ceremony where you take, a piece of matzah and a hard-boiled egg or some other cooked item, and you make the claim that this is the beginning of your preparations for Shabbat, because the prohibition on preparing on Yom Tov for Shabbat is really only preparing from scratch. So if you have started the process, so to speak, of preparing for Shabbat before Yom Tov begins, you can prepare in like the normal way. I should let you know, I personally am this year relaxing the prohibitions on malacha on the second day of Yom Tov. That's not a recommendation that the CJLS or the RA has done. I'm doing this for myself so that I can be with my parents at their virtual Seder on the second night, which I think is a worthwhile thing. If you're doing that, then even if you're doing that, let's say it that way, I recommend still using the transfer method for lighting a gas burner. Can you turn the temperature up on a gas stove? Yes, you can, if it is for the purpose of sort of cooking the food. That's not a problem on the second, on even on the first day of Yom Tov. The problem then is turning it down. So don't take the food out until you've actually turned the oven down. That's a sort of a thing to remember. I would also let you know that I and many other people use electricity on Yom Tov, as opposed, and even people who don't use electricity on Shabbat will frequently use electricity on Yom Tov. In this year, I think that's a leniency that we should adopt. If you don't normally use electricity on Yom Tov, I think that I encourage you to do so. Anything that's forbidden, obviously, on Yom Tov, you can't take your electric lawnmower and mow your lawn, because that's forbidden. But a food processor, not a problem, and then that'll ease preparation for Shabbat or other types of cooking that you actually need. I would recommend not using electricity on Shabbat if you don't use electricity on Shabbat currently.
I think there was a question before we didn't get an answer to about George Foreman grills.
Oh yeah, for George Foreman grills. Yeah, the only way of doing it is libun. However, the libun meaning application of fire. However, my impression is that the actual grill plates are metal, and that the plastic itself doesn't really heat up. So you can just run that George Foreman grill without anything in it, with the plates touching. It shouldn't actually damage the grill for some period of time. I recommend doing that in a safe area because anytime that you're getting anything super, super hot, you should be careful. Just be really careful.
Sam?
Yeah, hi there. What obligations do we have as far as cleaning outside of the kitchen?
So anywhere that chametz has not been present, you do not have to clean. So you don't have to clean bathrooms, or as long as you don't eat crackers in your bed, you don't have to clean bedrooms. But other places where in fact you've eaten chametz, those require a thorough cleaning. And what that means is, just a thorough spring cleaning kind of thing, and ensuring that there aren't, sort of crumbs lying around, let's say it that way. And then I would, just to say this, I'm sitting at my computer right here, and I can see, all of the places that I've spilled food from having eaten at the computer. So you should, clean that area well. Any tablecloths you should just wash on the laundry, and that's good enough. We keep our tables, generally speaking, covered with Passover tablecloths, but you don't need to go out and buy special tablecloths. As it's just the same tablecloths that you always use. You've just put them through the laundry. I would also recommend doing laundry on any clothing that you think might have been exposed to chametz during the course of your regular wear and has not been washed. It's a good idea to go into Yom Tov with laundry prepared. Generally speaking, we frown on doing laundry during Chol HaMoed. So if it's a real necessity, obviously, like you don't have underwear, obviously, whatever. But in general, it's considered to be one of those things that takes away from the spirit of Pesach, if you can get what I'm saying. Okay. Joy again. Hello.
Oh, I don't have a question. I'm good.
Okay, fine.
There was a question earlier in the chat about if where people can turn post-webinar for questions.
You're welcome to email me. I will answer questions. You should have my email address already. You can. It's also on the page for selling chametz that the RA has up. My email is there as well, and I'm happy to answer questions as best as I can. You know, if you know me and you have my phone number, which a few of the people here probably do, you could give me a call also. But you know, listen, my phone number's on all my emails anyway, so you should have it once we're in an email conversation. Yeah, I think that's my answer. I would also read the Passover guide that the RA put out, you know, pretty thoroughly, and I'd also look at their leniencies, because I think all of their leniencies are very, very reasonable. Yeah.
Melody has a question.
So I am not a Torah scholar, but I know a little bit about appliances, and wanted to mention something that I thought might be helpful. I don't know. If you have a very old range, most of them, especially the electric old ranges, I agree with you, totally unsafe, and Passover or no Passover, I agree with you on that. What we've been selling, I sell appliances. Most of the newer ranges, gas and electric, have a steam cycle. That's the way they clean.
Yeah.
Not really a Passover thing, but it's the way they clean. And my understanding is that to get to a steam level, it has to be 212 degrees, I believe. So
Yeah.
even if you had an old oven and you put a vessel in the oven and you raise the temperature with water in that to 212 degrees, couldn't you produce steam in the oven enough to clean it?
So the water is always going to remain at 212 degrees. You know, boiling water, because that's the point at which it sublimates to gas. The water itself will always be 212 degrees. The steam is obviously able to get hotter than that. I don't know how hot the steam gets. The problem with that process would be if the steam doesn't reach, you know, 500 degrees, and you've actually used the oven at 500 degrees, then you're not actually accomplishing the purging of flavor, the theoretical purging of flavor. So I would recommend just running it at the hottest cooking temperature. And that should be sufficient. If you use, however, just to say this, the steam cycle really does get all that grime off of the walls. So as part of your cleaning process, I recommend the steam cycle very, very much, because you can get into places that you could not get into with just a simple, you know, sort of cleaner. So if you do have one of those appliances that has a steam cycle, or if you want to put a pot in there and run it so that the steam fills up the oven as a part of the process of cleaning, I have no problem with that. In fact, I even encourage it. I would simply say, though, be careful about plastic handles, right? Yeah, because they can let off all kinds of fumes. And I would also be you know, sort of wary of opening the oven when it's full of steam. You can get a pretty bad burn from steam. So you have to be, the steam cycles themselves suck the steam out first. So, you know, if you're going to open it up while it's filled with steam, just be very, very careful. I would recommend actually turning it off, you know, before you open it, so that the steam itself condenses and dissipates.
I just want to jump into to give us an official end because we're already a little bit over and I want to respect everyone's time. I think we can leave the webinar open if people continue to have questions, and Rabbi Schwartz and Rabbi Bernard are still available, but I wanted to let people go if they need to. Thank you so much, Rabbi Schwartz, for the really helpful overview and all of this Q&A. I want to wish everyone a Chag Kasher v'Sameach, and we look forward to learning with you again online. I'm signing off for another Zoom session, but it's great to see your faces and to be able to learn with you. And again, Chag Kasher v'Sameach.
Okay. It was nice to have Rabbi Andelman on. Okay, any other questions? I'm happy to stay on another 5 minutes if people have, but then I do have an appointment. I have to go.
There was one quick request to repeat the concentration of bleach that you recommend.
Yeah, the one I recommend. I don't want people to like sort of make their countertops like fade. So I usually recommend 3 parts water, 1 part bleach. That's what I usually recommend, and that'll accomplish what we need it to accomplish without damaging stuff. Yeah, Naomi. Can you unmute Naomi?
Yeah, thanks. Did you just say two water to 1 bleach? I couldn't hear.
I usually, so either one is fine, but if you dilute it to 3 parts water, 1 part bleach, you can be pretty sure that there's not going to be any damage to anything that you're using it on.
Great. My question was about plastic. It was so interesting to read here that you could plastic that can endure boiling water. I had always thought that plastic was porous and you couldn't use it.
Yeah, this is believe it or not, this is the opinion of Ovadia Yosef. He who says that you should treat plastic as a metal vessel. I think he's right about this. We use plastic these days the way that we used to use metal. And many of the products that used to be made out of metal are actually now made out of plastic. And so if it can stand up to boiling water, if it's used for a boiling purpose, like you put a plastic container in a non-ABS plastic container in the microwave, then you can kosher it simply by doing hagalah. Yeah, by immersing it in boiling water.
So you mentioned Cuisinarts before. Do you happen to know how it, I always thought I never used my Cuisinart because I thought I'd have to buy a second bowl.
I think I was talking about a kosher LePesach Cuisinart. I think that's
right,
true. Right, and knives have a special status in any case. I would recommend using a food processor that's specifically designated for Passover, unless you know for sure that no chametz has ever actually been in the food processor. I think most of us aren't putting chametz in our food processor. If you know for sure that you've never used it for chametz, then you don't even need to kosher it. You can just use it.
I guess what's hard is, or not what's hard, skip the hard. What's been interesting to me about this seminar is that I inherited from my parents this idea of, what can I even say? Like anything that you use during the year, it's like it has cooties. So for instance, I have a separate soda stream bottle. Now one could argue I've only ever had water in there. I've never, had French toast made, but it seems like I've had it on the table with all this chametz, so it doesn't seem right to me. And I have a separate Brita filter pitcher too, which is, maybe crazy, but it's, my mother used to just say, may her memory be for a blessing, Helen Hirsch, she just used to say, this is all an excuse for a thorough spring cleaning.
Yeah. Okay. So to some degree, that's true. What I would say is all of this is custom. And I mentioned minhag, this notion of custom at the beginning. I think we're relaxing custom this year. Would I recommend it in other years? No. I want people to have the experience of Pesach. It was a major thing growing up, the experience of Pesach and completely changing over the house. So I want people to continue to have that experience. But this year, let's be real. It is good to limit these things to the extent possible. There are some things you have to say no to, but there are many things you can say yes to. in this year. And I think that to ease our already we have this sense of unease. I think to relieve that as much as possible is probably a good thing. And I think that's a good place to end.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Schwartz.
You bet.
And
Take
thank you everyone
care.
for joining us.
Okay.
God kosher v'sameach.
God kosher v'sameach.